Good evening. I am back again here for day 24 of our coronavirus quarantine. I hope everybody is doing well today. Another nice day. I hope you got outside a little bit. I'm joined, as always, by my two exalted guests, Mr. George Washington and Mr. Abraham Lincoln. My story tonight is about another American president, one who I've told a couple stories about already, who I find to be one of the most fascinating Americans of all time, Theodore Roosevelt. My story tonight is less, my last couple stories maybe were a little bit more humorous about him, but more a little bit about his tenacity and grit and how he dealt with tragedy. Teddy Roosevelt dealt with a lot of tragedy in his life. The first major tragedy in his life coming as a young man while he was in college. He was attending Harvard in 1878, and he was from New York. His parents lived in New York City, so he was in Harvard, which is in Boston, and he got word that his father was gravely ill. He did not know his father was sick, and all of a sudden word had gotten to him that his father was gravely ill and that he should rush home, and he did. Unfortunately, by the time he had gotten home, his father had already passed away, which crushed Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt was adored his father. Was highly revered. The whole family did. Theodore Roosevelt's father was Theodore Roosevelt Sr. Was known for his great philanthropy. Gave to all kinds of causes. They were a very wealthy family, but he gave to all kinds of causes. Did all kinds of good works of that nature, and was unusually close to his family for a wealthy man of his era. Most of the time they were often separate, off on business works, but he was very, very close to all of his children and his wife, and so it was devastating to Theodore when his father died. And for the rest of his life, he would have a picture of his father on his desk or near his desk or where he would work, and he would often think about when he made his decisions, like, what would my father think about this? Would he agree with this? He was so revered. Years and years after his death, he would still do this. So he was. There was a worry that he would really fall into despair here. But he went back to school and he really just dove into his studies to where he was, super focused on school, not only studies, but he was a member of multiple clubs while at Harvard, leadership positions within those clubs as well. And so just really totally made it so he had no time to think about it, basically. Totally immersed himself in schoolwork and in, the goings-ons of a student at Harvard, and was able to sort of fight through his despair through just hard work and tenacity. Unfortunately for Teddy Roosevelt, that was not going to be the only time of tragedy in his life. In 1884, by this point, he is married. He got married in 1880 to the former Alice Lee, now Alice Roosevelt. And in 1884, while Teddy Roosevelt, who by 1884 is now a member of the New York legislature and is in Albany, his wife, who is pregnant, is with their first child, is back home living with his mother in New York City. And he gets word that his wife has had their baby, and he's excited and elated, and everything is great. And sort of the spirit of that era, I guess. He wasn't going to run right back to see her. I guess it was just, like I said, sort of that era, the way the relationships work. He was going to finish out his term as in Albany, and then he would go back and meet his new baby, etc., as soon as he could. But he gets word a day later that she is in trouble. Not only is she sick, but his mother is sick. They're both in the same house. His mother has typhoid fever, and they don't know exactly at this point what is wrong with his wife. And so he rushes back from Albany to New York City to their home in the city, where both his wife and mother are staying. And and sadly, his wife dies of kidney failure 2 days after giving birth to their baby. So even more sadly is that 11 hours prior to his wife passing away, on the exact same day, his mother Martha also died from typhoid fever. So he lost both his mother and his wife on the same day. He was absolutely devastated. In his diary that night, he wrote, all that's written on that date is he drew a big X, and the quote on it is, "All the light has gone out of my life." And he was almost beyond consoling. For the rest of his life, he basically never would talk about Alice, his first wife, and would not allow anyone else to talk about her either, because he was so afraid that the despair would overtake him and that he would not be able to go on. He was so overcome. He did go back and he finished out that legislative term, and then he went to the Dakotas. He left his newborn child with his sister Mamie, and he went to the Dakotas and purchased land and built a ranch, and started working that ranch, and he would split time between there and Albany, basically about half the year in each place over the next few years. And And mainly it was because the ranching that was so busy. It was such a hard life out in the frontier. This is the Dakotas. This is late 1800s. This is still the frontier out there. That it's a hard life, and there's no time for reflection really. And he just buries himself in the work of building up this ranch. Between that and his political career back in Albany, and so he sort of trudges on and goes through that and to try to kind of overcome that grief. Sadly, that would not be the end of the tragedy in Teddy Roosevelt's life. Obviously, he does overcome that grief of his father, and then later his first wife and mother dying on the same day, and he obviously goes on to become president of the United States, and he has 6 children in all, 2 daughters and 4 sons, and in World War One comes up, and we joined in 1917. He petitions President Woodrow Wilson to he wants to have a volunteer regiment. He wants to lead a volunteer regiment in World War One, much as he had in the Spanish-American War in 1898. He wants to do the same thing. Woodrow Wilson does not allow it. It's a former president. He's getting up there in years, and he says no. But all 4 of his sons, which unsurprisingly, because they were brought up in the Roosevelt manner to believe that the most valiant thing a man could do was to serve in war, to have his what Roosevelt would call his crowded hour. And so all 4 of his sons, Theodore Jr., Archie, Kermit, and the youngest son, Quentin, all served in World War One. Archie and Theodore Jr. were both injured in World War One. They fought on the ground. Kermit served, was not injured. Quentin was the youngest and probably Teddy's favorite son, and he was in the fledgling Air Corps, and so he was a pilot here in these the early days of planes, and he was a pretty well-noted pilot. Shot down some German planes and things. But in July of 1918, Kermit is shot, or excuse me, not Kermit, but Quentin is shot down and killed in battle. And Roosevelt, of course, is devastated. Publicly, he says, we've just because we're wealthy, our sons should not be exempt from this. And Quentin died doing the most gallant thing he could do, but privately he was pretty devastated. It's interesting. His second wife Edith, she said, and I think this sort of sums up the Roosevelt feeling of this, is that yes, it was a tragedy, but you cannot raise boys to be eagles and expect them to act like sparrows. And so it was pretty much understood that if there was a war, that those boys were going to join. I think the moral of this story. Oh, by the way, Teddy Roosevelt dies 6 months later. Some people say it was a broken heart from the loss of Quentin. The despair was too much. Reality was that he had been on an Amazon expedition, 1913-14, and really disease and that journey had really racked his body pretty hard, and he was really slowing down by 1918, 1919. So it's probably less likely a broken heart than just a culmination of a life that was lived to the fullest, and particularly that trip to the Amazon that was pretty hard on him. But I think the moral of the story here is that here is somebody who faced a massive amount of tragedy. His father was only 46 when he passed away. His mother and his wife dying the same day. His youngest son killed in battle. And yet here is a man who is one of the all-time great Americans, achievers, a lover of life, someone who never let despair get him down. I mean, I think I heard this line somewhere once, so this is not mine, but I loved it. I thought about Teddy Roosevelt that said that tragedy wounded him, but it did not overcome him. And I thought, man, that's about a perfect way to put it. Where he was kept it going. It wounded him, but it did not overcome him. And one of the many reasons why Teddy Roosevelt's one of the all-time great Americans. So anyhow, that's my story for today. How Teddy Roosevelt dealt with tragedy. I think it's an excellent story. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope everybody had a nice day today. I hope you enjoyed some warm weather, and we'll see you back here again tomorrow.